Well, good evening, Bren, and welcome to the 19th Zoom lecture presented by the Lodge Hope of Karachi number 337. As ever, I'd like to give you all a warm welcome on behalf of all the members of the Lodge Hope of Karachi. The usual reminder about the Grand Lodge of Scotland guidelines, Bren. I can ask you to have your video on and your name clearly displayed. Can I encourage you also to sign the virtual tile on our Facebook page? And when you've got questions later on for our presenter this evening, can I ask you to put them into the chat? This evening will be recorded and will be shared on our YouTube pages later on. Gives me the greatest delight, Bern, to introduce to you a man who's not a stranger to many of you. He's past Provincial Grand Master of Renfrewshire East, and he's the chair of the History and Heritage Group of the Grand Lodge of Scotland that have recently presented a successful series of lectures on Scotland's oldest lodges. It gives me great pleasure to introduce to you this evening, Brother John Miller.
Well, thank you, Gordon, Right Lodge Master. Thank you very much, first of all, for your introduction, and thank you for your very kind invitation to present this paper here this evening. Can also just add my congratulations on the number of Zoom meetings that you've held very successfully. A real credit to yourself and to your lodge and to the craft. Well done, sir. Well done. Well, Brennan, my topic this evening is the two Saints John. Who were they? And how did they come to be patron saints of Freemasonry? And I hope this evening to help you understand a wee bit more about the personality, character, drive and commitment of each of these two saints, how they exemplified the principles of Freemasonry in their daily lives by their deeds and words, and why our ancient brethren came to choose them as patrons of Freemasonry. Now, brethren, our paper mentions many biblical accounts of their lives, and I'd ask that rather than thinking you're back in Sunday school once again, that you give some thought to the context in which these two saints found themselves some 2,000 years ago. I'd ask you, are they demonstrating by their thoughts and actions anything we might describe as Masonic? Are they attempting to make good men better? And do you hear anything that fits with brotherly love, relief and truth? Well, let's see. Every year on the day of installation, we hear the installing master address the master-elect and tell him that it is requisite that he has been initiated, passed and raised in the three established degrees of St. John's Freemasonry. But let me, of course, at the outset clarify that the patron saint of Scottish Freemasonry is, of course, St. Andrew. However, the dedication of the two Saints John still prevails in Scottish Freemasonry, where under the Grand Lodge of Scotland, the three degrees are officially designated St. John's Freemasonry. Other than that brief reference on the day of installation, we hear little or nothing for the rest of the year about the Saints John, and I hope this evening to shed a little light on that subject. I'm informed, however, that some lodges up north, further north than Fife, by the sounds of it, who have their installations in November, December time, refer to these as the Festival of St. John. Not something I'm familiar with down in this neck of the woods. The two saints in question are, of course, the Baptist and the Evangelist, who are considered two eminent patrons of Masonry. Looked at together, St. John the Baptist and St. John the Evangelist served to represent the balance of passionate zeal with learned knowledge of faith. Individually strong, together they stand as the harness focus of zeal and knowledge. The Saints John therefore stand in perfect parallel harmony, representing that balance. Who were these two men, and why did they come to be chosen by our ancient brethren to be patrons of our craft? Well, let's deal firstly with St. John the Baptist. Clearly a most remarkable man, the Baptist is mentioned in each of the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John. The Baptist was a mission preacher who led a movement of baptism centred at the River Jordan in expectation of the arrival of the Messiah. In John chapter 1, I can quote you, there came a man named John, commissioned by God that he might testify concerning the light in order that everyone through him must believe. He was not the light, he came that he might testify concerning the light, that is, the light of salvation. John's baptism was a purification rite for repentant sinners performed in living water, that is, a running river, in accord with Jewish custom. John had a burning desire, a mission to call on sinners to repent. He was driven to having them ready for the arrival of the Messiah, that is, preparing the way for the Lord. The Baptist was related to Jesus through his mother, St. Elizabeth, cousin of the Virgin Mary. His birth was foretold by the angel Gabriel, but John's father, Zechariah, doubted the prophecy and as a result was struck dumb until John's birth. Gabriel said, "Thy wife Elizabeth shall bear thee a son, and thou shalt call his name John, and thou shalt have joy and gladness, and many may rejoice at his birth. For he shall be great in the sight of the Lord, and he shall neither drink wine or strong drink, and he shall be filled with the Holy Ghost, and many of the children of Israel shall be turned to the Lord their God." Mary visited her cousin Elizabeth when Elizabeth was 6 months pregnant, and on entering her home and greeting her cousin, Elizabeth's baby leapt in her womb, and Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Ghost. Blessed are you amongst women, and blessed is the baby you carry. Well, Mary stayed with Elizabeth for the next 3 months. And when Elizabeth gave birth to her son, her relatives and neighbours expected him to be named after his father, Zechariah, as per the custom of that time. Elizabeth said, no, he's to be called John. The relatives and neighbours then turned to Zechariah to ask him the boy's name, and as he had been struck dumb since doubting the prophecy, Zechariah, his name is John. Immediately, his mouth was open, his tongue loosed, and he began to speak. Throughout Judea, the Lord's hand is with him. We belong to one of those groups. The Pharisees who kept the law of Moses, they believed in the supers and the afterlife, etc. And they rejected the supernatural, as they would not repent. Advancement to the several degrees. They practiced baptism as a symbol of purification. The candidate for admission was required to put all his possessions into the common treasury. He was apron regulations and placed on probation for a year, at the end of which, if found worthy, he was advanced to the second stage, where he remained for 2 years, when, if approved, he became an associate or full member. There was also a third grade called companion, by both to love God, so the society, the esteems of devotion, their self and absolute utter contempt of failures, a tender regard, kindness, in whatever form. And him was a fulfillment of the prophet Isaiah, chapter 40, verse 3. In the desert, prepare the way for the Lord, and make straight in the west a highway for our God. That is, that the repentant must show a genuine sorrow for sin, and prayer for mercy and pardon are required. Delivery from sin necessary. Messiah by the Sanhedrin to investigate him, and that's why he was baptizing if he were not the Messiah. And he told them, I baptize with water, putting administering the sign with water, while the Messiah alone can bestow the thing signified, the cleansing power of the Holy Spirit. John dressed in camel hair clothing, as did Elijah and other prophets. His hair and beard had a wild look about them, underlying the passion of his work. And this took precedence over such a minor point as his personal appearance. Jesus had to convince John by him This is the Passover, release from captivity, Lamb's blood saved the Jews. So the blood of Jesus saved mankind. I witnessed a voice from heaven saying, of his unshaken identity. And Jesus said of John, among them that are born of women, there have not arisen a greater than John the Baptist. As a patron of Freemasonry, it is said of the Baptist, when the Baptist presents us commit to order, emulating those great virtues which the great architect of the universe has imbued into the consciousness of humanity. Now let's now consider the other side. And his option previously. And this is the gospel of the evangelist. And Salome, he's described in the Bible as strongly affectionate and spiritual, of striking strength, energy, and decision. His dominant traits throughout his life being charity, tempered as religions, and chapter 9, verses 51 to 50, and the locals there had refused to welcome Jesus and the disciples. John asked Jesus if he, John, could rain fire upon them. He was, however, rebuked by Jesus. Keep the heat, he probably said to him. Jesus called John and his brother James sons of thunder, reflecting perhaps some deeper quality of character in them both. John was the youngest and arguably the most trusted of the disciples. He sat next to Jesus at the Last Supper. It was to him that Jesus entrusted the care of his mother at the crucifixion, and John faithfully performed his sacred trust for over 15 years until Mary's death. In his Gospel, John never refers to himself by name, but often as the disciple whom Jesus loved. And Christian tradition says that John the Evangelist was one of Jesus' original 12 apostles, the only one to live to old age and not martyred for his faith. And well, Jesus had at least 72 disciples, and he chose 12 to be his apostles. Apostle meaning one sent with a special commission from the Greek apostolos, meaning messenger. John had a prominent position in the apostolic body. For example, he, Peter, and James were the only witnesses of the raising of Jairus' daughter, the 12-year-old daughter of a synagogue ruler who was close to death. The same three, John, Peter, and James, were witnesses to Christ's transfiguration, when his face shone like the sun and his clothes became white as light. And this is often portrayed with Moses on one side and Elijah on the other. It was these three again that Jesus took with him when he went to pray in Gethsemane. Only John and Peter were sent into the city to make preparation for the Last Supper. After the resurrection, John with Peter were the first of the disciples to go into the tomb, and John was the first to believe that Jesus had truly risen. And Ben, I'm going to give you a quote from John 20, verses 2 to 10. I'm not going to give you the quote direct from the Bible, but rather from the New Testament written in Scots by William Lorimer, who hailed from Strathmartin near Dundee, 1885 to 1967. And William Lorimer, his father, his grandfather, and his great-grandfather were all ministers in the Free Church of Scotland. And his translation from English to the Scots reads as follows. Please bear with me. I know you guys up in Dundee and further north will see this is easy, but it's not so easy to read. Let me try. Mary of Magdala, just quoting her, they had taken her out of the grave, and we didn't ken where they laid him. At that, Peter and the other disciple as Jesus loved get out and made to the grave. For a while the twosome ran fit for fit, but the other disciple foreran Peter and went to the grave first. He kicked in and saw the dead linens lying on the ground. So there are William Lorimer's translation of that passage in the Bible. But the apostle, known as the Apostle of Charity, the evangelist is credited for his writings. 1 Gospel, 3 epistles, and the book of Revelations. Some biblical scholars still debate the authorship of these writings, i.e. that there were 3 Johns. The disciple of Jesus, secondly, the writer of the epistles, and thirdly, John the Divine of Patmos, who wrote the book of Revelation. And well, this is not a debate I'm qualified to enter into, and this paper assumes the evangelist is all 3 of the above. Brethren, John the Evangelist preached the gospel in Jerusalem, a dangerous place at a dangerous time. Eventually, he was imprisoned at the age of 90, was banished to the island of Patmos, where he was to write of the Apocalypse, the book of Revelation, the most complex book in the New Testament. In John's Gospel, he states that there are 8 signs or proofs that reinforce Jesus' true identity as the Messiah. And to John, a miracle or sign was never an isolated act. It was always a window into the reality of Jesus as the Messiah. And those 8 signs, according to John's Gospel, are as follows. I won't go into detail, we've got a paragraph on each. If there's any needs a clarification, perhaps you can ask me later. The first miracle performed by Jesus was when he turned water into wine at a wedding in Cana. Then we move on, the healing of the royal officer's son, and of an official whose son was close to death begged Jesus to come and cure him, and Jesus said, your son will live, and he did. The healing of the lame man, the feeding of the multitude, 5,000 men plus women and children fed with 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And brethren, interestingly, this is the only miracle mentioned in each of the 4 Gospels. I think in total there's something like 30 odd, perhaps 40 miracles throughout the New Testament. Fifth in the line from the evangelist was the walking of water. The disciples were on board a small boat when a great wind blew up, and Jesus, as he walked in the water, told them, "'Tis I, be not afraid." The healing of the blind man, and the disciples, on seeing a blind man, asked Jesus who had sinned, this man or his parents. Blindness then being considered a punishment. Neither, he said, but this happened so that the work of God might be displayed in his life. As long as in the day we must do the work of him who sent me. Night is coming when no man can work, and I am the light of the world. 7th in the list is the raising of Lazarus. The message of this event is that Jesus is the resurrection and life for everyone. And just again, a short quote from Mr. Lorimer. Lazarus come forth, and as the cock came out of the grave, his horns and feet swelled in dead linens, and his face happy in a napkin. And Jesus said to them, "Loose him, and let him get home." That's the way you speak up in Dundee, isn't it? Still. Lastly, of the 8, the catch of fish after the resurrection. And I'll say a wee bit more about that because it's something I had been blissfully unaware of and found out quite recently. The disciples had been fishing in the Sea of Tiberias all night without success. Jesus, on the shore and not recognized, asked if they had caught any fish, and when they replied no, he told them to throw their nets into the water on the right-hand side of the boat. And when they did so, the net was so full with 153 fish they could hardly pull them out of the water. It was then that they recognized the risen Jesus. This is Jesus rewarding the faithful. And rather, 153 fish, is that number significant? Well, this is the number of species of fish known in those days, and 153 is a reference to the blessings and abundance of Jesus' ministry. That is, throughout the New Testament, there is recorded 153 blessings given by Jesus to 48 separate individuals. And the abundance, that is, when it refers to the 153 fish, every species known at that time, indicating that every race and creed is to be included in his ministry. I'll say a wee bit more about the 153 fish because I know that Brother Gavin Burt is with us this evening, and he's a past master of number 153, Shores Royal Arts Lodge, so that's something you can take back to your lodge if you didn't already know that, Gavin. John is very clear in his purpose in writing his gospel. These are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in his name. John spent his later life after returning from exile at Patmos in Jerusalem and Ephesus in what is now Turkey. He became the patron saint of Asia Minor, where he had helped found many churches. In his old age, when unable to do more, he was carried into the assembly at Ephesus, where he said, "Little children, love one another." And he remarked that if they followed his simple commandments, it would be enough. John died in Ephesus, where a stately church was erected over his tomb. It fell into ruin in the 4th century and later rebuilt as a mosque in the 14th century, and this also fell into ruin. And Brian, if I can just ask you to bear with me for a second. I had the privilege 5 or 6 years ago to be in Turkey and visiting some of the older cities, the ancient cities, including the likes of Troy and Pergamon and Ephesus. And Ephesus, if you ever get the opportunity to visit, is a must. It's a beautiful city, ancient and in ruins, of course. But the buildings and the pavements and the streets, etc., are paved in marble. And as you do, I picked up a couple of pieces of marble to take home as keepsakes. However, at the airport, on the way home, a week or so later, there was notices everywhere confirming that anybody found carrying out any architectural items of any description would be in breach of the law and faced imprisonment. So naturally, I had a think about what am I going to do with this, and I'll get this piece of marble from Ephesus in my carry-on bag. And naturally, I had a wee look around to see where my wife's carry-on bag was, to see if I could put it in there. However, she had it over her shoulder, so I thought, too risky. So I brought it home and got away with it. Well, St. John the Evangelist is recognised as the apostle of love and light, the bringer of comfort to the grief-ridden, of courage to the weak, of help to the helpless, and of strength to the failing. He teaches us to subdue our passions, one of the first things we are taught as Masons. And brethren, overall, quite a Masonic CV. And when we consider that each of the 12 original disciples carried a slightly different message to the world, and all were martyred with a single exception of John and his simple message of brotherly love, should we accept this as a sign of what the great architect of the universe really wanted mankind to know? Is the importance of the simple message of brotherly love so strong that it served as a basis of Freemasonry for centuries? May brotherly love prevail in every modern social virtue cement us. Such in brief is the character of John the Evangelist, the disciple of Christ and one of the patron saints of Masonry. He is said to be the equal to John the Baptist because he finished by his learning what the Baptist began by his zeal, and by so doing drew a second parallel line to the first. There's no need to evaluate either saint or to make comparisons on their individual merits as patrons of Freemasonry. We can, however, hope, and I hope, agree that Freemasonry was wise to adopt both. It was the steadfast loyalty and devotion to truth of the Baptist, the sympathy, gentleness, love, and charity of the evangelist, which we must presume persuaded our ancient brethren, the two Saints John, he adopted as patrons. The one a prophet of righteousness, the other an evangelist of love. Surely the basic principles and purposes of Freemasonry. But when brethren for the Holy Saint John selected as patrons of our order? Well, we don't have exact dates, but ancient manuscripts indicate that the Baptist was selected long before the evangelist, who appears for the first time in any Masonic document in the late 16th and early 17th centuries. And that's a quote from a research book that I looked at. It doesn't actually tell me which Masonic documents. We don't know just when or just how Freemasonry adopted the Saints John. Their festival days are the Christian adaptation of pagan festivals of a time when man, knowing no better, worshipped the sun as the supreme god. The Druids celebrated the summer solstice on the 21st of June, the longest day, and the winter solstice on the 21st of December, the shortest day. The early church sought to purify these pagan festivals by taking the birthday of the Baptist, the date of the death of the evangelist, which are very close to those solstice days, church festivals. St. John the Baptist was fixed on 24th of June, and St. John the Evangelist was fixed on the 27th of December. Brethren, at every point in the St. John's histories, their circumstances, their messages, and their methods, we find the same sharp contrast that has its analogy in the extremes of the seasons in which their festivals fall. One of birth, coming in the summer, on the longest day, and the other of death, falling upon the shortest day of that season, when the hand of death seems laid upon all nature. When these festival days of the Baptist on the 24th of June and the Evangelist 27th of December are celebrated, we remember our ancient ancestors. They giving thanks to the only God they knew, the sun, and the craft of the great architect of the universe, for two amongst the greatest of the saints, those holy men whose precepts and practice, ideas and virtues, teachings and examples, all Freemasons should endeavour to follow. In both of these saints, we can see their integrity and fidelity are so regularly contained in our Masonic rituals, and we trust exemplified in our own lives and actions as Freemasons. Well, let me just very quickly and briefly make mention of the Lodge of the Holy Saints John of Jerusalem. There is, of course, no evidence that either saint was ever a member of the craft. They were, however, adopted as patrons, and so naturally became the idea or ideal of a sacred lodge in the Holy City, presided over by the Saints John. No such lodge ever existed, and yet it's not a fiction, but an ideal. An ideal we should pursue, ever trying to find the ideal in the real. We cannot say for sure why they were chosen, but I hope that you might now have a better understanding of why the Baptist and the Evangelist were considered to represent the balance of passionate zeal with the learned knowledge of faith. Now, perhaps a question for you, brethren. If either of those two men had asked you for an application form to join the craft, would you have done so? And would you be happy to sign it as a proposer on a seconder? Brethren, I hope this paper on the two Saints John has given you an insight into the two patron saints of Freemasonry, and perhaps some food for thought on the spiritual nature of our craft. My thanks for your attention, brethren, and my thanks again to Brother Gordon Beachy, the Right Worshipful Master, for his kind invitation to be here this evening and present this paper. Thank you, brethren.
John, on behalf of the Lodge Hope of Karachi and all our guests here this evening, can I thank you very much for a very enlightening and inspiring and uplifting presentation on the two St. Johns, particularly at this time of national crisis. I think a lot of the characteristics that you've talked about there have been shown across the length and breadth of the Scottish Constitution and trying to support those in need during COVID-19. Brennan, I think we've got a couple of questions in the chat room for Brother John Miller, and we've also got a couple of comments, some bounding on the witty, others not. And I'm not sure if the comparison with you and Brother Lord Elgin's forebear of pockling bits of stone from foreign fields is
Maybe just a wee bit
breeding
of stone.
disgust or not, but there is a comment, are we harbouring a criminal within our midst? But I'm sure that that is certainly not the case, John. But I will tell you who posed that question later on then. But
Thank you. I need
wasn't
to
it
know.
Brother MacLeod?
Right.
So the first question, so which John was St. John, the Baptist or the Evangelist?
They were both saints.
I think he's talking about the Gospels possibly, which
Oh,
St.
the Gospel. St. John, the Evangelist. It was he who wrote the Gospel of John. He was an evangelist.
Okay, so that's the only question so far. Brennan, is there any other questions from the chat, or is anybody else? Okay, so Rolf Keel, since when is St. John the patron saint of Masons? I know that at the wall of Melrose Chapel, the French-born Mason John Morrow dedicated his work to Sweet St. John.
I think there's evidence that the stonemasons of centuries ago adopted the Baptist as their patron saint, and I think that was evident in is it St Giles in Edinburgh? I think that's something I'd need to come back to you on, but I think St Giles Church in Edinburgh, there is reference there to the Baptist and being the patron saint of the stonemasons many centuries ago. So he was first.
Okay. A question from Ken Wallace, and we have, I think, the Deputy Master of the Lodge that he's referring to. So he may, if you don't know the answer to this, John, we could maybe fling it at Tom Edgar. I remember hearing Lodge St John Fisher Row 112 being referred to as Lodge St John Fisher Row. Is this correct? Or are any other lodges referred to similarly?
I'm sorry, I can't answer that. I don't know. I know one or two lodges named after, well, having St John, and are named St John singular, and I don't know, to be honest, which St John they refer to. I'm sorry, I can't answer that.
Tom, are you still with us? Do you want to jump in and give your views as a member of Fisher Row?
Thanks, Gordon. As far as I know, that Lodge St John Fisher Row was dedicated to St John the Baptist when first formed in 1768. There's not a lot of information regarding John the Baptist in the lodge, and there has been a wee bit of research undergoing as we speak, and hopefully find out the proper answer at some point soon.
Okay, that's
Well,
great.
good luck
Thank
with your researches and that, Tom. That would be very interesting to find that out. But you know, St John Fisher Row is a fairly aged lodge, of course, 300 years old, the sounds of it, or close to. So the chances are there was a stonemason who became the patron saint of that lodge, and that would be the Baptist, as you suggest.
I think as well, John, when it came to it, that St John Fisher Row was actually a fisherman's lodge, which was added. St John was the St John the Baptist with the fishwives and the fish that was produced allegedly by St John.
Mm-hmm.
That's why the lodge was named St John Fisher Row. It was a fisherman's lodge.
Brian, I would just like to give a little plug for Brother Tom Edgar's interesting magazine. There's a lot of Masonic magazines out there that you can get, but if you go to ISU, the magazine online depository, and you type in St John Fisher Row, you'll come across their magazine that is very interesting and comes out. So a comment for you, John, as one of our previous speakers, Mike Neville, would say, it's only criminal if you get caught. So that's quite good for you. And one from Siva. If this is not a stupid question, in your opinion, which one of the two St Johns is holier?
Well, my initial reaction would be the evangelist, because of his close association with the Messiah. He worked directly with him, so that's an opinion. Please don't ask me to justify that. It's just a gut feeling and I'm sure that there'll be fans of the Baptist who would disagree vehemently with me.
Okay, thank you. Stevie Chalmers' comment, many other lodges have St John in the title, and probably the contender for the oldest lodge in our province, the Lodge of St John, or as it's now known, the Lodge of Dunfermline, has obviously St John in its title. Ronnie Forbes comments, Lodge 46 in Auchterarder preferred to be referred to as St John's Lodge, number 46. But as a past provincial Grand Master of that province, he's saying he's got no idea why. And you might want to comment on that a little bit, Ronnie. No, he's... So, Stuart Saunders is coming in, John, with a comment. In Central Europe, the lodges celebrate June the 24th with a special festival in their lodges. Each brother attending is presented a small sprig of 3 roses, white, pink and dark red. And the question to you is, can you enlighten on the connection, Johannes de Teufel? I think that's how you pronounce it.
A simple answer, no, I can't enlighten you. I don't know. That's I've never heard of that before.
Okay, I think that's one we'll take to the Facebook discussion later on this evening, Stuart, and we'll try and find some information out for the Bren on that one. Stephen's got another follow-on question to his holier one. Another way of asking the question then, and again it will be in your opinion, John, is which one of the 2 St Johns do you think was more steeped in esoteric traditions?
That's a very, very good question. The Baptist, I think. I would need to think about that more in a bit more detail and perhaps research a wee bit more on that. But my gut feel would be the Baptist.
Okay.
I'm just making a note of
that. Stevie Chalmers has got a comment. He's saying oops for his typing skills. St John's Royal Arch Lodge 320 in Ardrossan, which is his dad's mother lodge. So another one. Sandy Thompson has a question. Why do you think we celebrate with a festival of St John after an installation?
Those lodges who celebrate their installations, which St John are they celebrating at the time of their installation? I presume it's the evangelist in December.
Sandy, do you want to come in and add a supplementary point to your question? I need to unmute you.
So we do actually have our installation in late December. So yeah, it will be the latter of the 2. John.
Yeah, that'd be the evangelist.
But why? The principle is why? Why do we actually do it? Why do we have a festival?
It's a celebration of the craft, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, we have the currently in the Grand Lodge. We won't doubt if we'll have it this year. We have the celebration of St Andrew at the end of November.
So it's really only tradition then.
I would say so, tradition.
Yeah.
Unless the lodge has something more mystical in the background that perhaps we could. How old is the lodge?
It'll be 125 in 2025.
Okay, so it's not one of the oldest lodges, but it might be there's something in the background there, some reason that could be brought to light if in your records in the lodge, perhaps, why it was established then.
Fine, John. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy.
Thanks, Andy. A comment from James Watson. I know at the closing of 175 at Greenock St John's, they refer in plural by saying to the Holy St John's, Saints John.
Yeah.
Well,
our 2 patrons, the 2 saints, yes.
A question in the private chat, why not Thomas, patron saint of craftsmen, architects, carpenters and masons?
Good question. Why didn't they choose Thomas? I mean, I think it was down to hear from Coning, because I'm pretty sure that the the festival day of St Thomas is in 20th, 22nd, something like that, of December, and that coincides with the installation, the annual installation at Mother Kilwinning, and that's a reference to St Thomas.
Okay, James, if you'd like to unmute yourself. James is from Mother Kilwinning. I think he's got his hand raised.
Hello, yeah, it says it's the Festival of St Thomas in December. Am I coming through?
Yeah,
Yes,
we can hear you.
Which St Thomas though is could be open to some argument. I know that they think it's the disciple, but there's also a St Thomas à Becket's Day celebrated late December as well. What the connection between Kilwinning and Thomas à Becket, I've no idea. Or it just could be the patron saint of Masonry. But it's St Thomas, and I'm quite sure across Scotland there'll be many other lodges who have traditions maybe attached to different saints. So it's not universally St John.
Yeah, I can tell you, Jim, that just last year, Mullen Lodge, Thistleton Crown and Nielsen, we sponsored a burns competition in each of the 2 primary schools, one of which was a Catholic school. And I had to go across there just to have a chat with the teachers and organise, they were organising the competition, etc. And what surprised me was standing at they were inside the porchway at the door of the school, St Thomas's school, was a statue of the saint, I'd say about 2/3 size. And what surprised me was that he was holding a square, and the square wasn't just a wee square. It was, can you see it? It was sizable. So St Thomas, outside that school in Nielsen, the Catholic school, the St Thomas there is holding a large square, and I think he was an architect of some description, and I think that probably refers to the fact he was carrying a square.
Okay, Brother MacLeod, you've got your hand up as well. Would you like to come in?
Hi, John. Thanks very much for that. I was very in depth. I think that's the most I've heard about the St John. Just on the one about St Thomas, I wonder. I mean, I've never looked at that side of it, but you know, the incorporation had St Thomas, and I just wonder if perhaps some of the speculative lodges chose St John just to be different from the actual operative Masons at that point. But what I was going to mention was, you know, obviously my lodge has probably got one of the most complicated names, Houston St Johnson, because we don't meet in Houston, and why we've got St Johnson has been a bit of a conundrum, even to the point where Graham Roberts, who was given the Johnson Supporters Player of the year, ended up going to Perth, thinking that the St Johnson was something to do with them. But we chose, our banner has St John on the eagle, and the reason for that from the minutes seemed to be we picked the Evangelist because we weren't in the recess. Our installation was always in December before 1900, and we used to have the torchlit processions and so on. So the lodge actually chose St John the Evangelist as well. There's no mention to the Baptist, but it might well be because the Baptist was during the recess. So it was round about the probably 1830s where St John the Evangelist was actually chosen as the banner to the lodge. And I wonder if it could be as simple as that lodges were still functioning in December, and therefore we chose the Evangelist as one of the, I suppose it was a 50-50. I don't know, it's never really, it's always been a curiosity as to why some have got the Baptist and some have got the Evangelist, but probably most lodges with an installation in December relate to the Evangelist.
Yeah, I would think so. Lost in the mist of time in most of these lodges, of course, but if their installation is in December, you would guess it would be the Evangelist.
Yeah, but thanks again, John. Excellent talk.
Apologies for my mother-in-law phoning. A comment from David, does or can status holy have degrees? So holy, holier, or the holiest someone or something seems to be holy or not, isn't it? I wonder. And I think that's a good point for us all to ponder. Ian McIntosh, one of our guest presenters. The old Craft Mason Lodge is always held their main meetings on the 27th of December, so it was always St. John the Evangelist. Another comment from Germany, Rolf. In Germany, Craft Masonry is generally called St. John's Masonry, and we assemble around the festival of St. John the Baptist. In Germany, Johannes der Täufer. My German's getting better than my French, I think. Charles Stewart from number 2's got a comment marking the feast days of the saints. And James Burns Hogg. In the 1860s, about 7 lodges within the borders all added St. John to their name. He doesn't know why, but again, maybe that's a good piece of research that could be conducted at some point. From a comment from Scott Gibson, a member of the Lodge of Edinburgh, Mary's Chapel, number 1. And Scott goes on to say, as far as I was aware, the Lodge of Edinburgh, we were given the Isle of St. John the Evangelist in St. Giles in Edinburgh to upkeep in the 15th or 16th century.
I think he's right, because I think I said it was the Baptist earlier. I think I said the Baptist, but he's right, it was the Evangelist.
Tom Edgar, a comment, most lodges who were named St. John were to celebrate the days of feast. 1781, Jim Reeves has a comment, have their installation in April. And Jim, I'm assuming that that's a St. John Lodge that you're making reference to having their installation in April. Rolf Keel again mentions Anderson's Constitutions. Anderson's Constitutions obliged the lodges to assemble at the Festival of St. John the Baptist to install their office bearers. And Alec Craib from up north, one of the oldest St. John's lodges, at St. John's number 6, we have our installation on the 3rd Saturday in December, but we celebrate our Festival of St. John on the 27th of December at a regular meeting. And again, I think that comes back to tradition. Ian McIntosh again talks to us about a lodge in Forfarshire, Lodge St. Thomas of Aberbrothick, number 40, and Arbroath is named after St. Thomas a Becket. And Jim Reeves, 1781 have their installation in April, and they also call their festival the Festival of St. John afterwards. Bob Potter states it's worth reading The Origins of Freemasonry by Professor David Stevenson. And for those who don't know Professor Stevenson, he wasn't a Freemason, but his 2 books are really worth reading, Bren, if you want to know the development of the Scottish craft. This question pops up throughout, and Bob suggests that you can also draw your own conclusions from what he is saying. So, Bren, John, that's the questions that we've got in the chat room. So at this point, can I once again thank you very much for your presentation this evening on the 2 St. John's.
My pleasure.
I'm sure it's a subject that we'll be able to continue on the Facebook page later on this evening. Bernard, just as I was going through and we were talking about the St. John's and what's happening nowadays, I noticed that Two Bern on my front screen are using the technology to promote charities that they're involved in. I'm slightly cheeky, I've also got my Poppy Scotland flag behind me too. But as these are going public, Bern, as well, if you want to change your background to your favourite cause, as Bob Potter's done and as Ian Walsh's done, I think it's a really good way to get out, and we've got information there about the guide dogs and the Seagull Trust. So Brennan, just would encourage you maybe to consider that for future meetings. In terms of future meetings, Bern, this meeting will be available later on this evening on our YouTube channel, and I would encourage you to subscribe to that. We have got a speaker lined up for next week, Bern, Brother Bruce Zawalski. He's a Canadian brother, and he's going to speak to us about Freemasonry in New France. Last week we heard about the development in Freemasonry in France, but this is going to be New France, and there's a lot of connections with the presentations that we had from Ian McIntosh around the Jacobites. Bruce is serving in the Canadian military, however, and he is out on exercise in the Canadian hinterlands. He does assure me he has Wi-Fi access, and we are still planning to go ahead with him, but there may be a last-minute change if, with the timing, and his Wi-Fi goes down out in the prairies. I might be bringing forward one of our speakers that we've got up our sleeve. But with that, Bern, once again, John, on behalf of the Lodge Hope of Karachi, can I say a huge thank you. I will stop the recording now, Bern, and we can say our normal thank yous and good nights as I unmute you all.